Do you love spy books, movies, and TV? Then the Spybrary Podcast is for you. Since 2017, host Shane Whaley and Spybrary field agents around the world dispatch reviews and interviews with authors, historians, and fellow spy fans. We discuss everything from John le Carré, Len Deighton, Paul Viddich, Graham Greene, Mick Herron, Charles Cumming, Ben McIntyre, and many more. Spybrary is available on all good podcast apps and at spybrary.com.
Hello everyone and welcome to Spybrary episode 204. On episode 202 we shared our best books of the year, what had been published that year, and what books we had discovered from yesteryear that we enjoyed last year. And I was waxing lyrical about a book called Big Bear, Little Bear. And I'm delighted to say that we've got the author, David Brierley, joining us on today's episode. And Big Bear, Little Bear, set in 1948, and the Russian bear has devoured Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, and Hungary. In Czechoslovakia, an underground British-run resistance network is betrayed and wiped out except for a single survivor, the embittered professional agent George Orris. As the Russians turn a hungry eye on Berlin and the Americans plan for what will become known as the famous airlift, Orris chooses the devastated and divided city as his personal battleground on which to unmask the traitor inside British intelligence. Only pups believed in coincidences, and Orris was an old fox. 4 years in this field and you were an old fox, or you were dead. Delighted to bring you this conversation with David Brierley, and we are joined by the legend himself, author of Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, Mike Ripley. And welcome to Spybrary episode 204. We've got a real treat for you today. A friend of the show, Mike Ripley, is joining us. Now, as everybody knows, Mike is responsible for so many divorces among Spybarians and bankruptcy cases ever since his book Kiss Kiss Bang Bang came out. I thought I knew a fair bit about thriller writers, but I knew not much. When I read Mike's book, it set me on a whole odyssey of finding books from writers from yesteryear. And we're also joined today, I'm really excited about this, by author David Brierley. Welcome to Spybrary episode 204, gentlemen. David is an author who has penned 12 crime and spy novels, David.
There's 12 until this was published last month.
Dead Man Telling Tales, Old Sins Castle, Long Shadows. So that's the first in a trilogy you've written, correct?
First in a trilogy. It's a rather unusual trilogy because the first two are standalones, as it were. The first one is set in Latvia. The second one in Hungary. We've got an entirely different crew. The third one is in Tunisia, and it brings together people from the first two. The third one, a bit of a problem in that Putin's war has meant that it's had to be rewritten, and it's up to 38,000 words. So it's coming along, but it's not ready yet. The first two are with the publisher. This one they published already, and the next one is called After Eve, and that will come out I don't know, late spring, I suppose. I don't know. Tom Cole, are you listening to this? When is it going to come out?
Absolutely. So the first one is out now, right? So it's available on Kindle and on paperback.
It is, yes.
So I will link to that in the show notes so that our listeners can go and pick up a copy. I know I've just ordered one. I'm flying to London next week. I will be reading that on my flight, so excited to dig into that. Mike, it's been a long time since we've spoken on the podcast. I think the last time we spoke was when you released the paperback version of Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which was pre-COVID times.
We've met in pubs more often, the podcast section. But, I'm no fan of modern technology, as you can get already. So, but it's going to be here.
Absolutely. No, it's good to see you. And let me ask you then, how do you guys know each other?
When I was working for a company called Ostara, who published top-notch thrillers, and it's over 10 years ago now, I suggested that we do, my job was finding them, was to do Cold War, which I long admired, and featured one of the few female spy protagonists from the great spy writing era. And I'd always liked the book, and we made contact with David and got his approval to do a new issue, a reissue of it. Now, no sooner had I done that and got to meet David, but an old friend of mine, Len Deighton, got in touch from Los Angeles, where he was living at the time, saying that he had seen my thing about my bringing out Cold War. And was this the same guy who wrote a book called Big Bear, Little Bear, which Len had just bought in a, what we call second-hand shops in America. The
used store.
We'd say a charity shop. But,
yeah.
And I said, no, never heard of it, but I think it is the same guy. And he said, well, for goodness sake, do Little Bear, Big Bear, Little Bear, which we did. And I read it then on Len's recommendation for the first time. And I was absolutely blown away. And so we did that one. And I think that's the one that sort of caught on. But then if Len Deighton says you ought to read this, then you tend to do so. And then with two books, then David and I started to meet in a pub in London near the Palladium, whenever he came up to town to equip himself for his expeditions to the Far East, because he's always traveling somewhere. And as I've seen from the books, I mean, they're set in Germany, France, Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Latvia now, but also Tunisia and in various bits of South America. And he puts all this down to research, where I get to go to Hackney once a year, and that's it for me.
And Pimlico.
Yeah, true.
And Pimlico. David, how does that make you feel that, Len Deighton is recommending your work?
Well, I recommend his work, so I'm very glad. You talk about my books being set in, Mike did, my books being set in all these countries. This does have a terrible effect. I'm going to go back now to about 1988. I was living in a small town just north of Watford in England, and my daughter was at university. My wife was spending the night with her mother in London, and so I was on my own, and they knew this. Where I was living was the last house in a lane, so the street light stopped there, and beyond was fields and woodland. So it felt quite isolated. At 7 o'clock at night, there was a knock at the doorbell, a knock at the door knocker, and I went there, and a security light had come on, and I could see through a little diamond glass in the door a man whom I didn't recognize, glaring at the security light. And I opened the door because there was a security chain on it, and he said, "David," he said, "do you recognize me? I'm going to leave this name out now. We were at Mostyn House together. Do you remember?" Well, now then, my childhood was moved around the world quite a lot because of my father's job, and I had been in that school for 3 years. This man, I hadn't been particularly chum. We had never corresponded at all. So he said, "I'm just passing down the bottom of the road, and I thought I'd come and see you." So I went into the pub, and they said, "Oh yes, he's up there, just before the wood." And at that point, I knew he was lying. But unfortunately, he was quite a big man. By this time, I'd let him come in because he said he was at school with me. lying, and he said, "Why are you holding that big knife in your hand?" And I said, "Well, I was just making my supper in the kitchen." Oh, he said, "Well, let's go in there and have a chat." And I said, "How did you find me?" Well, he said, "I was just passing by, and so, asked to the pub, and they said, 'Come up there, and you'll see him, last house.'" I'd never been in that pub before. How did he know my address? Because I left that school when I was 13, went back to South Africa. I had then lived in Canada. I'd come to university in England. I had been to France as a teacher. And I had moved to London. And then I bought this house. So there are about 5 or 6 changes of address. So how had he found this out? And he wanted to know, what are you doing now? And I said, "Well, I write books." "Oh, what kind of books?" So I told him, and he said, "You must go to a lot of places then." I said, "Yes, well, yes, these are Iron Curtain countries I've been to." And after that, he left. And he was obviously checking me out. But I mean, he was such a bumbling person. He must have been, would you say, special branch from Watford to come out to see me. He certainly wasn't a MI5. He wasn't clever enough for that. But he was quite a big man. I didn't want to annoy him while he was still in my house. So there we are. I've been checked up, I think, by the authorities.
Do you think the bumbling act was, well, that it was an act, that he was just trying to
yes, he
fool
was.
you a little bit?
Yeah. Anyway, I've never put that into a book yet because I'm a bit suspicious. I've signed the Official Secrets Act. Do you think that covers everything, the whole of my life? Does it? You see?
Why did you have to sign that?
I worked for 15 years in advertising in London, and one of the accounts I worked on was the Royal Navy recruitment, and for that I had to go on a Royal Navy ship, and before I could go on that, I had to sign the Official Secrets Act. The interesting thing, which I did, the interesting thing was that I had to have some kind of rank when I went on the ship. With a frigate, so really a boat. It was smaller than a ship. And there was a long discussion as to what rank I should have. And in the end, they decided I should have the rank of captain. A captain in the army is quite lowly, but that captain in the navy is really quite high. And I discovered that the skipper of this frigate I was on was only a commander, so I outranked him. So that's why I've signed the Official Secrets Act. Do you think they're going to? Do they check up on Spybrary? Do you think?
I think so. Certainly, since we had Alan Johnson, the former Home Secretary, on the show, they probably. It's quite funny. I was saying to someone the other day, I do get emails from people who've worked in the security services that do listen to the show, and it always strikes me as quite funny because I think if I worked in that, it's a busman's holiday, right? Then to come and listen to a podcast about it, but some of them do. So I guess quite a few of them do enjoy a good spy novel.
Yeah. Well, the Big Bear, Little Bear starts in Prague, I believe, doesn't it, Mike?
Yes.
It does, yeah. And I had a letter, because this is long before there were emails, from an American who had been at the embassy in Prague at the time of the takeover. And he said that I got everything absolutely spot on, even down to the smell of the place. And he said that he had various bits of film he'd shot, and maybe we could get together and put together a documentary on it. But somehow, living in America, and I'm feeling that his documentary wouldn't have been very interesting, would it? And but my research in Prague, naturally, it wasn't in 1948 when he thought it was that I went there. So my research would have been when did it would be? Well, Big Bear, Little Bear was my third book. I must have been to Prague before then, wasn't I? I can't remember now. It's terrible.
That book came out. Big Bear, Little Bear came out in 81, I believe.
Yeah.
So pre-81.
I must have gone there to do my research, because research is very important to me. It's some people don't do it. and it shows. It shows they've looked at a map and think they know the town, and they looked at the map. It's a bit like Adam Hall. Now, Mike will be very pleased to hear this name being brought up, won't he? Elliston Trevor, his real name. Adam Hall, we know him as the writer of the Quiller books. And I was, together with my 12-year-old daughter and my wife, we were going to go camping in the Rockies. We flew to Denver and hired a car and went up to the Rockies and stayed at we pulled off the road, didn't like the looks of any of the campsites, pulled off the road up in the Rockies. Well, once a day, the state troopers would draw up the road and peer at us and decide that we were quite harmless, and they'd drive away again. It was nice. And then because we were going to go down to Mexico, and Phoenix was on the way, I got Collins, who was publishing me then, to get in touch with, let's call him Adam Hall, get in touch with him and say, I wanted to come and stay with them. Okay. Then in fact, they rented an apartment for me to sleep in. And how we get to recognize, well, they lived in Scottsdale, which is a kind of suburb of Phoenix, and she would come and pick me up. So this white Cadillac came up, and we introduced ourselves, and she drove up into the hill above Scottsdale to his house, which is just near a place called Apache Junction, which I always think is it's a nice address. And the first thing she said was, "Can I wash your clothes for you?" Now, because we've been camping, so we smelt a bit. So that was nice. Then we had we were going to have dinner there, and I don't say that it was very gastronomic. A roast chicken had been brought in, and she opened a can of boiled potatoes, and we had that. And then we would have a drink, and Madam Hall produced a wine box, and he put it down in front of me, and my wife knows at the table. And he himself got a bottle of wine out, superior bottle of wine, and opened that for himself to drink while we were having the stuff out of the wine box.
Wow.
I think is a really strange way to behave.
Yeah.
Anyway, he wanted to know when I'd been before I did this, had I been on a research trip to Berlin? And I said, yes, of course I had. Because he said when he wrote the first the Quiller Memorandum, I think that was his first one. He said I'd never been to Berlin. I just made it all up.
Wow.
So yeah, and he's
Mike, what was it about Big Bear, Little Bear that blew you away when you first read it?
If I'd been expecting another Cody book, I was mistaken, because it was a stone cold spy thriller of what I would call, or what Len Deighton would call, a proper spy story, not a spy fantasy with any sort of dynamic protagonist who always gets away with it. These were real people, real spies, and everybody seemed to be betraying everybody else. And it was lovely because it starts off, if you remember, David, in Czechoslovakia, and it's Oris, the main character. His Czech network is blown completely, and it's then, I'm not giving too much away, I hope, but it's then a question of how he comes to terms with that as an operative, and in a way gets his revenge. But I just thought the sparse spareness of the whole thing, this was a dirty world portraying extremely well. And I thought it was wonderful. And, again, if Len Deighton says, read it, then you do. And I was very grateful for that. And I thought it was critically, I thought it was a classic piece of espionage fiction, which, I was delighted, very proud to get back into print. And I'm also very proud of the fact that I think Spybrarians, through this channel, I mean that literally, have taken to it, because the number of nice comments that have been about it have been fantastic. I only hope that, well, although Top-Notch Shows doesn't exist as a company anymore, the book is still in print and hopefully will still go on to sell. But I must just say one thing whilst I remember, because you're talking about Adam Hall, I do remember always classing, I think I did it in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, your heroine Cody as, and I quote, the female Quiller. And having mentioned this to a fellow Spybrarian, Jeff Popple, who will be watching this in Australia, yesterday, or this very morning, he sought out his records of reviews of books, and he turns out to be an even bigger nerd than I am when it comes to keeping records of old books.
Right.
And he's dug out his review of Cold War from 1970, whenever, or I think it appeared in Australia slightly later, and his notes just say, liked it, sounds like a female Quiller. So there you have us two experts of those. They're pretty good, because we think Quiller is pretty good for Adam Hall. And so he's on side on that. But I don't think you've ever done anything quite like Big Bear, Little Bear. I mean, argue by all means. And I love some of the Cody books, and I'm particularly enjoying Skorpion's Death, which I'm rereading the first time in God knows how long, and thoroughly enjoying it. But Big Bear, Little Bear stands out as your standalone. I think that's your classic, mate. I really do.
Well, the rights for Big Bear, Little Bear have now reverted to me. So any publishers out there willing to make an offer?
Well, I know Tim Shipman messaged you on the Spybrary community, and if you're listening to this and you're not a member of the community, get on there. It's spybrary.com/community. So I know he's speaking to a few people about Sarah Gainham as well. So you never know. There could be something in the offing there. And I agree with you, Mike. So you flagged up this book to me and said Len had recommended it. And then it was in Shipman's top 125 spy writers list as well. I thought
because Tim had read mine.
Right. Yes. And I thought, right, as regular listeners know, I have a ton of books next door, which are all set in Berlin, spy books. I thought, right, got to get on this. And it also, for me last year, it was the best book I read in the year. And we do this thing, best book, spy books of 2022. And I deliberately said books that were published this year, but books you've read this year from yesteryear. And there's a line in the book, for those of you who haven't read Big Bear, Little Bear, it says, he had no weapon but his wits. It takes more than physical strength to slip past the snares of the field. Oris was resilient, resourceful, suspicious, reliant on himself and nobody else. He was a survivor. Only in marriage his private war had he lost. And I think that one paragraph there really does sum up George Oris and why this is a different kind of spy book. The Big Bear, Little Bear opens, he's in Prague, he's waiting to meet the contact hasn't shown up, the secret police are there, and, Oris has to sleep under a pile of leaves in central Prague as he's waiting for his contact. And then you have this whole, you describe it so well, and I could tell that you researched Prague, David, having visited Prague myself. I love how, and again, I don't want to give too much away, but, relying on his wits, he shacks up with a lady of the night for the entire night, not to do the bizzo, but, hotels need names when you check in, so he hands out there. Then there's a whole backstory about a family out in a farm in rural Czechoslovakia that he holds up with for a while. So it's a very intriguing story. I mean, I really couldn't put it down. From the first page, it really does hook you right in. Phenomenal spy writing, David.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to think of another book I wrote, which the first sentence, the first time she showed herself naked to a man was on the dessert trolley of the.
I can tell you. The quote is
that?
The Cloak and Dagger Girl.
Because I wrote something somewhere which David read about reviewing a book, which the review began to, this is the first book I've read where the female protagonist is stark naked from the word go. And David then sent me this. I said, oh, no, it isn't. And I have it, you even autographed it for me.
Nice.
Because the first paragraph is indeed a woman in a very dodgy situation in Romania, in Bucharest, appearing on a trolley, being served as a dessert to members of the Ceausescu mafia.
Right.
And how she then gets her revenge is the book. But so she's actually naked, but there are strategic portions of whipped cream applied, I think. I must read it again to be sure.
Yes, no, I might read that now. I'll have to add that to the top of my list.
But then again, David, you also made your name, and I was trying to think of a geographical expression that if we say Ambler territory, you think of sort of Istanbul, Turkey, Greece, maybe. That sort of the south of France. And you can say other writers who take Berlin instantly. But you've done sort of what used to be the Eastern Bloc. And I can't think of any other books I've read, apart from Geoffrey Household, long time ago, that have done Romania and Czechoslovakia and Hungary, like you have. So you're sort of north of Amber, if that makes sense. But I think you made that territory your own, and I'm now very interested to see what you're doing with Latvia as well.
Yes, well, I was in Latvia. This trilogy has been going on for a number of years now, and Mike has read an early version of it, which didn't impress him. So it's too long. Well, it was cut down from 115,000 words to 88,000, so that's much better. I went to Latvia. It was in January, and just for my normal researching, a lot of people do their research with books, but which is fine, and speaking to people. But I do like to pace the streets. Marks and Spencer's, when they still had clothes that you actually wanted to buy, had a thing called management by walking around, and they walked around the stores and saw what people were looking at, and so on. And that's what I do. I do research by walking around, not getting in touch with people who were there. The only time I've done that was in fact when I went to Prague. The second time I went to Prague, and I was staying in a. When I got that, I went for tourist office and said, I don't want to be in a hotel. I want to be in some private accommodation. And they gave me an address, which turned out to be just off Batsklaski na Miesti, Venstre Square. And the woman there had been a model. So she'd been very beautiful when she was younger, but she'd eaten too many large Czech meals. All of which have dumplings. Put on a lot of weight. And she got me an interview with Hubble's, who was then present, with one of his advisors who spoke English, and that was interesting. And he said things like, with coming of democracy, it really changed our life. He said, for instance, everybody used to go to football, but now there are many more things to do to the football stadium. They're only half full now. Everything had changed with the democracy. And he was the only person whom I really felt whom I got in touch with when I was there. It wasn't any use at all. When I was in El Salvador, I was given the address of somebody at the American embassy. So I got in touch with him and arranged to have dinner with him. And he came with a Salvadorian girlfriend. And for him, it was a social evening. And I couldn't get any information out of him at all. And the Salvadorian girlfriend was hopeless. I said I'd been to the National Museum and I'd seen something about Shippy Totek, who was this is a horrifying thing, that he was sort of a witch doctor, and in order to make the crops grow, he flayed alive a young girl. I mean, stripped the skin off her while she was still alive, and that made the crops grow. And I wondered if that would explain something about El Salvador in its civil war. But neither of them had been there to the museum, their own museum, to see this kind of thing. So that was a wasted evening, really.
Mm.
So,
When you go to somewhere like Prague to do research for a book, what are you looking for in particular, David? When you're pounding those streets, what's catching your eye?
Well, Prague was such a long time. I know when I was in Latvia, I was really interested about the various strange statues we saw around. It wasn't just Milda who was on the front cover. That's Milda, who's the
Yes.
statue of freedom. There was a one with a donkey with a bear and a dog and a cat. Now, what on earth was that all about? I've absolutely no idea. These strange things. And walking over the river, whose name I can't remember now. I've never seen such a dead river. There were no little boats there. There was nothing there except just brown water and a bit of flotsam, but not interesting stuff. Just cardboard cartons that we've done there, and then going to the railway station and being walking out of it because I'd been out for the day, and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that whore coming up and saying, "Guten Abend, mein Herr," assuming that I was German. Whereas every other place they'd assume you were English or American, but no, it was German there. And looking at the old market on there, which was at one time it was the biggest covered market in Europe, and then it kind of shrunk down to nothing. Going out into the suburbs, walking along a street. I always want to get the locations right where I'm going to have scenes. Walking along a street, I see that the taxi refused to go down there, and so I was walking down it, looking at the numbers, seeing how they've been done. Some of them had put hearts on them around their numbers, some taking the numbers off. Some houses were boarded up as winter, naturally. Then coming to, here's house number 18, that's the one I'll use. Because it was a 3-story house, and it had a little tacked-on tower at the end of it. And then curiosity, I peered inside the garden. It really looked like a dump. Huge money to build this house, and then nobody had ever looked after the garden. And hello, who's chopped a bottle of Bailey's Irish Cream over there? Bailey's Irish Cream in Latvia. I mean, you can't make up a detail like that. You see it. So I enjoyed those things, and then coming back and seeing I came back by tram, and seeing people breaking into a run and realizing the tram was coming, and the tram waiting at the stop, and I got on, and it said centre on the side, on the destination port, so I knew that was going to be all right. And then get my money out, and I've been running, and my hand was shaking from running, and my coins falling on the floor, as if I was nervous. Sort of things like that stick in my mind. And then in the evening, I would go out with my notebook to a restaurant, and I'd order a bottle of wine and sit down, and I'd write up all my notes for the day. So that's if anybody wants to know anything at all about them, they're upstairs in a folder, all my notebooks from going away. So I suppose my daughter might be interested in them, when I die, but I doubt it. That's nonsense.
I'm curious to know what you found thrown into the gardens of Hackney, Mike, when you were doing your research.
Nothing I could possibly repeat on the family broadcast.
Yeah.
But no, I'm just very generous. I do know, excuse me, Len Deighton has similar notebooks, lots of them, except he draws. in them. So he will take notes, and I've seen some of the ones he did for when he was writing $1 Billion Brain, which is set in Finland. And there are drawings of Finnish customs officers' epaulets and uniform, and a tag from a Helsinki customs office, and things like this.
Yeah, I do a lot of research, and I had this idea that I hadn't set a book in a country which was having a civil war, and so I would go there. It seemed a good idea at the time, which is what we talk about our mistakes. So I would go to El Salvador in 1984, and I went to London. I went to I think it was the consulate, not the embassy. I knocked at the door, and nobody came. I knocked on. Finally, a man came and peered at me, through a little spyglass, and I said, I'm going to your country, and I want to have some advice about you moving around. He said, my advice to you is not to go at all. It's very bad there. And he closed the door, and that was that. So that wasn't a very hopeful beginning. And I went to something called the Committee of Human Rights in El Salvador, and they said, well, nobody goes to El Salvador now. No tourists go there. Businessmen aren't going to set up business there. You're not a priest. You're not a lawyer. You have to have some excuse for going there. And so I got my agent to ask around, and finally I got a letter from a Fleet Street paper saying that I was a correspondent. So when I went there, I stayed in the Camino Real Hotel, which is a posh place for all journalists to stay, and UPI had their offices there, and the boss of UPI was the person to go and see. And he said, "Well, you want a press card?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Right, that'll be $25, please, and a photograph." And the next day I went back, and he gave me this press card. I don't know whether you can see that. It shows me facing a firing squad and an exploding volcano in the background. It's very useful. Really saved my life. I pinned that inside my passport. So when I did some traveling around, very, very, very difficult. But about every half an hour on a bus would stop. All the men had to get out. They didn't bother with the women. All the men had to get out, put their hands up on the bus side, and then they would be frisked for weapons. And then they want papers. And my passport, my God, a British passport. This was obviously, he's obviously a communist terrorist come here. And they would go off to a radio, and all my details would be sent back to master control somewhere. But they saw that I had this newspaper man's passport, so that saved my life.
Yeah.
To Santana, which is the second city, and there was gunfire in the night. The next morning, I asked the woman who owned the place about the gunfire. Oh, she said, "You needn't worry. That was just pistols. It's when you hear rifles that you ought to be worried." Ah, I see. I'd been about a week in El Salvador, maybe a bit longer, and I'd moved to a less expensive hotel on the Camino Real, and I was having breakfast one morning. It was quite nice because we were breakfast tables around the pool, and a man got up from another table and came and sat down. "Do you mind if I sit down with you?" he said. We'd already sat down, and then he started asking me a question. "What are you doing here?" So he's American. And I explained to him that I was doing research. "Oh, you must have seen a lot of people here." And on he went. And he said, "What are you doing today?" I said, "Well, I'm going to go. I haven't been down to the beach. It's February. It'd be quite nice to go down to the beach here." I met a Puerto Limon. I went down to the beach and down to Puerto Limon and walked along, found a lovely beach, stretched for right far as I could see, not a person on it. And I had a nice swim in the sea. And I went back to have lunch, and there was the same guy from breakfast, still wearing his dark suit, still carrying his briefcase, and he was going along the backs of shacks, which were little restaurants. He was opening the door, peering in, and then going on to the next one, opening the door, peering in, on to the next one. And then he stopped because he'd seen me. "Oh, hi," he said, "I see you've made it." And he turned around and went away. He went out to get his car and drove off. And I was having a drink with an American journalist that night, and I explained all this, and he said, this man questioned you at breakfast, and I said, yes. And then he followed down to check up on you at Puerto Limon. I said, yes. He said, when are you leaving? And I said, well, I'm booked on a flight to Miami tomorrow morning. He said, be on that flight. You've got the CIA after you. so I wasn't very, very happy until the plane took off.
David, what was it about the spy genre that attracted you into writing spy novels?
Well, I don't know. It's a difficult question to answer. I mean, I was maybe I started with detective stories and Philip Marlowe. Maybe I just sort of edged sideways from that. I don't know that I was ever particularly drawn to them. It's just very strange. Talking of Philip Marlowe, I met Raymond Chandler once. I was teaching. I haven't told you this already, have I? No. Teaching in northern France. When I say northern France, it's north of Lille, if you can imagine anywhere north of Lille without straying into Belgium. And there was a horrible place called Tourcoing, and it had cobble streets and trams. It rained a lot, and there was thin beer. Real Seminole country, that. And I went over to see my girlfriend, and she was in an Oxford college, and her eldest sister was also in the college. So we went to have a cup of tea with her in the afternoon, and then Dora, and in came a woman followed by a man, and the woman was, let me get this right, my girlfriend's sister's fiance's mother. Right, I'll check you up on that to see if you remember that at the end. And she was a literary agent, Helga Green. And one of her agents was indeed Raymond Chandler. And in he came, bumbling in, saw there was tea being drunk, and he had no interest in that. And I think that she'd been sort of guarding him in England. I think she'd taken him to Blackwell to sign books. And he called in a few more pubs on the way. He was absolutely pissed when he came in. He said, go on. Kiss Helga, he kept saying to me. And Helga and I looked at each other and decided this wasn't going to be a good idea. So eventually he shambled off. But there'd been an earlier incident when he'd been to a couple of pubs, and then he'd gone into someone or other's house in their sitting room, and he wanted to have a pee. He didn't like normal people that asked where the bathroom was. He saw there was a Berry's magical fire. They've got 2 electric bars for heating, and then behind they got these dancing flames to give the impression that it was a fire. He thought it was a real one. So he unzipped himself and peed into it. And I don't know who got the bigger shock, the fire or he did. He picked himself up from the ground, and he seemed to be all right after that.
Wow.
So that's Chandler.
Yeah. So I want to take you back to Big Bear, Little Bear. So George Orris, the character, I mean, how did you, there's a lot of tradecraft in your books. And as I understand it, you didn't work for they. How did you come up with that tradecraft? Was it something that you researched, or was it your imagination?
I think it's all Le Carré, isn't it? Don't we all get our tradecraft from Le Carré? I can only think it was that. It's certainly not that I would tell you if I'd been a spy, of course, but I don't think it was anything other than just reading Le Carré.
Right.
That's all I can say. Thank you very much, Monsieur Le Carré, who is now dead, for your tradecraft. Yeah.
But then also, so I read Cold War, your debut novel, 1979, features a female lead. And I think what surprised me the most was, very often in Spy, we mentioned Le Carré. I think it's universally accepted that he didn't write women particularly well. Mm. You do with Cody. She's not kind of, stricken housewife who's been cheated on by her husband, and she's also not the all-action hero like Atomic Blonde, right? So I think you write women characters exceptionally well, David.
Thank you. I think that I do. To be frank, I always get on better with women than I do with men. I think that women tend to like me. I'm always fighting them off. All these honey traps that they set for people coming into their country. So I think that I do that. I like the woman in Dead Man Telling Tales. No, it's the next one. Is it the next one? No, I like her. Well, there are two in there, but I like the second one, Lucia, very much, because she's a really strong character. Don't know, Mike, have you read it yet?
I only got it on Wednesday, so no. But I was going to say there are very strong female characters in your other non-Cody books.
Yeah.
But, in fact, if they're not the leads, then they're very strong second lead characters. And I agree with Shane. That is a mark of your writing. What I would like to ask is, having admitted to the Carré, but what were your other influences? Who did you read in the crime or spy genre? Who do you read?
I actually read very little. My life seems to have been constricted to doing other things. I don't know what it is. I used to read much more, and I should be reading more now, but I seem to be reading less. And this is something I must address and do better. One book I read was Neil Robinson's The Other Side of Trust, which I enjoyed very much. But that's largely in Iran, and I don't think the Iranians would give him a visa to visit the country again, because he's not very complimentary about it. It's a shame about Iran, but it is a lovely place, and I would like to go there. I've had two friends who went there about 2 or 3 years ago, and she is a judge. She's a diminutive woman, but she's a judge in England, and she's the kind of judge that the government appoints to look into things, that kind of thing. And she was absolutely furious at the way she was treated in Iran, and made to cover her head, and they just dismissed as a nobody. Whereas her husband, who was with her, has a small metal. It's a bit difficult to describe what it is. A small metal working company. Whereas she's a really high flyer, and she was just treated as dirt in Iran. So I don't think she would want to go back. In fact, I'm sure she would want to go back. Yeah.
David, back in the day when you were writing Big Bear, Little Bear, and Cody, who were you reading at the time? Do you remember?
I have to say no, I don't remember. Big Bear, Little Bear. That was a long time ago.
Early 80s, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that, you did write that book in the early 80s, and through Mike and through Tim, sharing that in our Spybrary community, a lot of people are and I get very nervous. I don't often sing high praise for a book because, my taste is different from others. But what I've noticed here is no one has come back and said, what are you smoking, Shane? Everyone has come back and said, wow, what a great read that was. Yeah. David Clark is a big fan. He was asking as well about how did David come up with the tradecraft for Oris, being such a believable kind of
yeah. Well, it's
spy. Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of imagination, and then certainly in Czechmate, which I've just finished this morning, I felt I ought to get it read. There's a lot of tradecraft in that, and I suppose it's just imagination, isn't it? It's what we're paid to do, imagine things.
I wonder how Oris would have dealt with that knock at your door from the guy who said he'd found out about you at the pub.
Yes.
How would George? Because there is that scene in Big Bear, Little Bear that I loved, and it includes a sniper. And Oris comes back to London. He goes to his house and he's penned in his room. Now, I'm not someone who generally likes books with snipers and guns and action, but you wrote that very, very, very well. And I love the part where he said he would grab the nets to shroud himself, but his ex-wife had run off with the nets or the curtains. There was a lot of detail in it. Wasn't just a shootout.
Yes, well, I think detail is important, provided it just doesn't become too long-winded. It's important to have a detail in there. It shows that you've really known about it. I'm surprised that all the detail in Czechmate. Honestly, I mean, I have been to Czechoslovakia and Prague. I'm surprised I have all that detail in it. I can't imagine where I got it all from.
Well, those were in the days before Wikipedia,
yes,
before the internet, and a lot of authors now are using Google Maps and a lot of the VR technology. I have a VR unit, and I was looking around the pyramids the other day. You actually feel immersed. You feel like you're there, but you didn't have any of that technology, so it was your research trips and reading up on these places.
So you've looked at VR on the pyramids in Cairo.
Yes, yeah.
That can give you no impression of what it's like when you're actually there.
True.
You notice things. You notice they're trying to get you to go on their camels, and you notice that it's just not the same. You don't get the same feeling from you have to go there and suffer it if it's not pleasant. You really have to do it.
Well, during the pandemic, Amazon brought out something called Amazon Explore, and I work in the travel industry, and that was where you worked with a live tour guide, and they had a live camera, and I did 3. I did one in the Death Strip in Berlin, at Bernauerstrasse. I did another one, funny enough, in Prague Old Town, and another one at a tea farm in Taiwan, and they were good. I enjoyed them because it was COVID. We were all locked down. It was a little bit better than, watching something on Discovery Channel because it was 2-way. Like I could ask the guide questions, but the smells weren't there.
Yeah.
And the smell of a place or what the locals are doing, wearing, saying, the sounds that you hear, that's the pieces that I think are missing with the kind of immersion technology.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
But I've always wanted to go to the battlefields of North Africa. I read a lot about Rommel and the Africa Corps, and there ain't no way I'm going to Libya anytime soon. So I'll have to take the, the VR technology, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But also, I think, there's a great benefit in actually being there and interacting with whoever else is there.
Yes.
And an example, nothing to do with espionage or even crime. But my wife and I were in a very famous church just outside Ravenna in Italy. And we were looking at this long line of sarcophagi and tombs and stones with inscriptions on. And we were saying, that's fun. And behind us, down the main aisle of the church, came a school party of Italian school children with a teacher. And so we just kept ourselves being British, and then we realized they weren't moving on. They weren't going past us. And eventually the teacher, who was a very charming 20-year-old female, came over and said in very broken English, "Are you understanding this?" And we said, "What, you mean the inscriptions?" Which were in Latin. And we said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, can you tell us what they are?" So we had to translate Latin into English, into Italian, so she could then tell school children, because she didn't read Latin. And my wife was, "Well, it's 50 years since we did it at school," but and it's that sort of thing that makes Italians not understanding Latin. That's crazy. That's true.
David, so you've got the trilogy coming out, but when was your published book before this? It was some time ago, right?
Oh, decades ago. Yes, I mean, I don't think I've published anything for about 15 years, have I, Mike?
1999, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's 20 years ago.
Well, yes, the trilogy did take a lot of what was done over a number of years, and I kept making it shorter, saying Mike won't like it, it's too long. Cut some more out of it, which is a good thing. It makes it much better.
I'm glad you agree. Yes.
Yes, and doing the same with the other two as well. I'm not going to. Well, of course, I've got the third one. I've got another 50,000 words to write. I shall be doing a bit of that. I'm going. Where are we now? Saturday. On Thursday, we're flying to Bangkok and having 6 weeks in Thailand. And the first couple of weeks, we're just going to go to a small island. It has no electricity, no Wi-Fi, nothing. So we're really cut off from the world. Very nice place. We've been there before.
I know. I get these postcards with him in a hammock amidst dense jungle green. He never bothers to tell me where it is.
Right.
And I get as far as that,
But what did inspire you, David, to start writing after decades of not publishing anything? You've got a trilogy coming out. What was it that inspired you to start writing again?
Well, I have been writing all the time, but it's just been the same 3 books being cut down. And the one I'm reading at the moment, I had a terrible computer malfunction and lost the book, and I found that luckily I had printed out a very early copy of it, and it's absolute rubbish. But that was written about 10 years ago. So this is what I'm rewriting now. The place where we're spending the second bit of our holiday in Thailand does have Wi-Fi, electricity, and Wi-Fi, and they've got it's a very nice place on the banks of the Mekong River, looking over to Laos, and they've set up little arbors with trees on them and benches, and they're done with Wi-Fi, so you're in touch with the world of what I think maybe I'll do a bit more of the third book, which is needs to be finished now, doesn't it? It really does.
Yes, yeah. Definitely. Get on with it.
Well, I'm excited to dig into the first one of the trilogy, but from hearing from you today, I think I have to give Czechmate a go first.
Well, I haven't, so do I, because it's the one I have never read.
There we go. Czechmate. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for sharing some of your Saturday afternoon with us here and coming on Spybrary. David, it's an absolute pleasure to meet you. Your books have given me a lot of entertainment. I actually reread Big Bear, Little Bear over Christmas time because I want to do a brush pass review for it on a future episode. But also I was like, was that book really as good as I thought? I need to double check. And it was. Like, even on a second read, was even better.
Absolutely.
What a chum you are to say something like that.
How much are you paying him, David?
Sorry, Mike?
How much are you paying him?
No, not at all. It's and then I read Cold War, thoroughly enjoyed that. So I'm going to be digging into your back catalogue as well as reading your new stuff. So thank you for coming on.
I'll recommend Skorpion's Death, which is one of my favorites.
Oh, really?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And I will add that into the show notes, which because do you have a website, David?
Do I have a website? No.
Okay. So I'll send people come to our show notes to get links to your books then, which is at spybrary.com/204. Mike, thanks a million for coming on. It's been way too long since we've had you on the podcast. Now we've got Roddy Ho has fixed your technology. We need to get you back on for more chats because you've got a lot of knowledge and experience. You know a lot of people, and we'd love to. We talk about David's books. Winning a lot of new fans on Spybrary. You are revered among Spybarians for Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and also your monthly column on Shots Mag, which we share and enjoy.
You haven't noticed the glass, have you?
I can't read what it says.
I drink and I know things.
Marvelous. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming on the show today. It's been an absolute blast.
All right. Thanks very much for having us.
I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation, and I know you did too. And an hour doesn't do it justice, by the way. Could you imagine sitting down with a couple of brandies with Mike and David and hearing all the stories that they have? I highly recommend David's work. I've read 2 books, and it's amazing to me when I asked him about tradecraft when he said that he didn't have a grounding in it or hadn't done an awful lot of research in it, because it's a very authentic, gripping, suspenseful type of tradecraft. And we didn't get to talk about it on this episode, but Cold War, his debut novel, there is a passage where Cody, the female lead, comes home and she's found out from a neighbor, a nosy neighbor, that her apartment's been... men in grey suits, if you will, have been in there. So she's searching the place, and you get to read her thoughts as she's doing it, as she's trying to stay in control, but she's also a little panicked, trying to figure out what they were up to in her flat. And then you read her worries about, have they contaminated the water? Is it safe to pick up the phone? Really suspenseful writing. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I can't wait to read more of David's back catalogue. Do me a favor, if you enjoyed today's show, leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts, or share it with friends who also enjoy spy literature. But the best thing you can do right now is join us. Come out of the cold. Come join our Spybrary community. There's almost 3,000 of us in there. I know I talk about this on a lot of episodes, but seriously, the knowledge in our community is second to none in terms of recommendations of spy books and movies and TVs. A lot of knowledgeable people on there, and it's been the best thing we did around this podcast was create that community. And you can join us for free over at spybrary.com/community. I will add links to the books we referenced today, especially to David's new book that's just out. And you can find that at our site, spybrary.com/204. Who do you want to hear from on the podcast next? Who do you want us to converse with? Author, fan, etc. Drop us a note, shane@spybrary.com. Until next time, take care out there.
Thanks for listening to the Spybrary podcast. You don't have to wait for the next episode. Join the conversation happening now at facebook.com/Spybrary and on Twitter @Spybrary.